All right, hi everyone. I think we're gonna start the call off, and if anyone joins after this point, that's great. So, welcome to sort of one of our, I think one of our first community calls here from the Carl Open Repositories Working Group. We're calling on behalf of the task force or the task group on community building and engagement. My name's Jessica Lange. I work at McGill University. I'm a member of the task group on community building and engagement, and my co-host today is Jordan. I'll let Jordan introduce themselves.
I'm Jordan Hale, the Digital Repositories Librarian at the University of Waterloo.
Great. All right, so I think everyone has started to introduce themselves in the chat. So has anyone not? So just take a minute and just say hi, say your name, where you're at.
I love how everyone's so keen to start entering their answers right into our our agenda for today. Don't feel pressured to do that now.
Yeah, we have currently 42 people on the call, so this is great. Jordan, do you mind just moving the slide forward one for me? Sorry, Jordan.
Oh.
Jordan's driving the boat, so I need.
Is it?
Yeah, you gotta drive the boat for me.
Oh, I'm on the third slide here.
Oh no, I'm not. I'm on the first slide still.
Oh no. I'll figure this out. How about you share yours?
All right, sorry everyone. Let me just switch
Here, I will
to
stop.
here. Okay. There we go. Okay. Share screen. There we go. Is that everyone seeing that well? We're on the third slide. Let me anyone know if I'm not on the third slide. Okay, great. Yeah, so today this is on behalf of the Open Repositories Working Group, which is a Carl working group that's meant to advance strategic initiatives individually, but also at a Canadian and national level related to the open access repository community. So you may have seen some of their work recently, the Advancing Open paper that was released in 2020, working with the Open Air module for DSpace, and then the white paper on institutional repository statistics. Today, this is the task group on community building and engagement. So as you can imagine, having a community call talking about repositories or the common challenges, having us all get a moment to introduce ourselves sort of meets very well the mandate of this task group. And so our goal is basically we want to have a more cohesive national approach for repositories in Canada and have a stronger community of repository managers and practitioners. So the idea is that we're going to have to start developing strategic communications for Canadian repositories, get a better understanding of our differences, needs and experiences, which is where something like this call comes in. And yeah, this is the first call that we're doing as a community building activity in the 2020 to 2022 group. So we're hoping to hold one of these every couple of months on various topics, some of which we're hoping to get some of your ideas for today. In terms of the logistics, so Jordan and I have both already introduced ourselves. Feel free to ask us questions via chat. For now, we'll have everyone stay muted and have your cameras off. But when we get more into a discussion, we'll invite people to talk and unmute themselves. And as you saw, we're using a Google Doc to basically drive our notes. So then we'll have sort of everyone's input at the end of it that we'll be able to share afterwards. Are there any questions before we sort of delve a little bit more into it? All right. So let's keep going. So I think some of you already started working on this. So in the shared document, if you haven't already, take a moment and enter in what software does your repository use?
So one of the ideas one of the ideas that led to this, the formation of this first community call, and hopefully what will lead to further community calls, was what my colleague Chris Gray referred to as, wouldn't it be nice if we had a DSpace Anonymous support group? So I'm personally happy to see all these DSpace folks here. But, and I joked when I first joined the ORWG that I introduce myself in professional settings by, "Hi, I'm Jordan. We use DSpace 5.10 XML UI. How are you?" So it's, I like seeing that. Sorry, this is one of the things that I want folks in the call to note. Is there anyone else out there who has the same setup as you?
Yeah, and unlike the DSpace folks, I follow the other side, where I'm one of, I think, 2 Canadian universities running a completely different software. So those of you who are also running your open source solutions in-house, we can find each other.
Seeing some Island Dora folks. Some shared repositories. Some vendor hosted repositories. Couple Eprints in here, couple Bpress.
Right. So if I think, how are we doing here?
I think everyone's excited to get on to question number 3.
All right. There you are. So go ahead, Jordan. Yeah.
All right, so how many staff work with your repository? So here, even if you're just lurking on today's call, that's totally fine. As one of the recommendations of the Advancing Open report was to get a better understanding of what staffing situations are like across our respective institutions. So right now, consider all of your librarians, your developers, anyone who is doing copyright review and content ingestion, any co-op students you might have working with you. And I will try and find a line. Oops. The challenge with this is when you accidentally create typos for other people when you're when you take over typing. And I really represent our work in fractions.
The half person, we all know the 0.2 person.
All right, so we seem to have a nice mix of repository managers. We're dedicated repository manager librarians. Brianne says she's a librarian who is useless. I don't think so. Some copyright folks, student assistants. I like how we've got a number of places have students involved. I really miss having a co-op student. It's a lot of fun.
It's also interesting to reflect on how much time other people spend on your repository besides yourself.
Yeah.
I'm sure some people feel like they're not just one person, they make up kind of 1.5 or 2 people. So.
And it's interesting to see that I joked about fractions, and it looks like most of the staff working on Canadian repositories it is one of a number of responsibilities that they have, or one of many demands on our time.
I think it's also interesting to see, I mean, we can come back to this later, like Calgary said that no one full-time does it, but that you're sharing it across a number of positions, and how you find managing that versus a model where maybe you have a dedicated person.
But I feel like one thing we all share is the management of different fingers in our pies.
All right. I see anonymous chipmunk is typing. Will everyone continue to get them in? I mean, Jordan, if you had to kind of, I say I'm looking at somewhere around 2, 1. That sort of varies. I wouldn't say.
Yeah, or even half of one, like half of one FTE to 2. Dana says in chat, so many different skills and roles. What one dedicated person could do it all? Catherine says it means doing one part of the job successfully means the other parts suffer.
Yeah, it's like we all know each other's jobs. Okay. Oh, we're on to the double A's now too. We've used up all the letters of the alphabet.
I'm genuinely excited to see that. And yet one dedicated person is often expected to do it all. Karen, you are right.
And I agree with the too many pies. I feel like my pies have expanded. Anytime the word open happens, I get another pie.
I feel like we all deserve our own savory or sweet pies for being here.
And it also seems like it's a mix. Like you might have a librarian, you might have a developer or a part-time developer, and then a part-time like administrative or what we call maybe a non-librarian staff member. So it's sort of, the repository also falls under a number of different sort of positions within the library in various capacities. Okay. Did we want to move to the next question, or rethink how we're doing with how many staff we have? Did anyone answer, do you work with a vendor for support?
A bunch of people answered that in the first question, actually. So that's cool.
And I see now everyone's just getting on. You're so excited to fill this out. Okay. Let's move on to the next question, which is, what do you collect? So repositories come in lots of shapes, sizes, mandates. So, are you primarily a place for theses and dissertations? Do you have data in your repository, articles, preprints, other things? Sort of similarly, are there things you absolutely do not collect and do not want in your repository? Broken promises. Thanks, UNV. All right. So I see some people saying pretty much everything except digital collections. A lot of theses, articles, book chapters. Yeah.
It all goes into DSpace.
Data going in a separate repository, in some cases going to a Dataverse. I know I have one of my colleagues from McGill on the call. Maybe they can type for me so I can narrate and not also try to type. Undergrad thesis nominated by a faculty member. Yeah.
Ooh, I like what Maria's doing at U of T. Things you want to have in an ideal world. And it's not in the question, but I see some folks are filling this out. I'm interested in whether or not you're hosting open educational resources in the same repository as everything else. At Waterloo, we are launching our library OER repository, I think today. I haven't gotten the email yet, but it's done.
And I was saying to Jordan that at McGill, we one of the few things we don't collect is what I call like syllabi, slides, like teaching materials, basically. So OERs fall in a slightly different category because they could be considered a publication, but we don't want, you know, everyone's handouts and slides in our repository.
I'm curious for folks who host conference proceedings, if you host the conference proceedings for conferences hosted at your institution, or if they are just for the faculty members affiliated with that institution.
Yeah, and that brings up an interesting question for the institutions that do have something, say like bpress or OJS or a journal publishing platform, if they use that rather than using the repository.
It looks like oh, go ahead.
No, I was impressed by Calgary wants to capture 3D objects. You were, I'm impressed by your, what do you call that here? Forward-thinking abilities.
And some folks who are doing audio and video, and lots of folks who want to do audio and video, but find that challenging. I understand.
Yeah, I see Bian responded that they do conference proceedings for their hosted conferences. But yeah, usually for ones they host.
Cool.
Okay.
Oh, I like U of T's want and do not want. Okay, now we had timing set out in our agenda, but everyone's gotten so excited to just fill out these questions. Now let's move on to the Meteor parts of this conversation. And this is where we will be getting folks to speak up if they want to share. What's something that's working well for your repository? If anyone wants to sing their praises, I believe you can raise your hand somehow in Zoom. If anyone has if anyone's done a project recently that they'd really like to shout out beyond the Google Doc.
Do we have any hands raised? Yeah, just feel free to, or if you can't raise your hand, put your name in the chat and let us know that you'd like to talk. Well, why don't I lead off and maybe break the ice? We've had a real reception for open research in general to do following COVID-19. Researchers seem much more aware. They seem much more engaged and much more interested than I ever found before. We recently put a news item in a faculty channel. And we had them, I think we had 15 different researchers contact us with their CVs trying to make their work open. My repository administrator asked me to warn her next time before I did that, because we don't usually get that kind of response for campus news items on open access. Oh, I see, Maria, I see your hand is raised.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to share what works for us. I think it's the fact that our repository has been around for a while. It predates me by at least a decade, but it's well established by now. So thankfully, we're over the hump of the establishing a new service kind of struggle. And it's somewhat known. I mean, U of T is a big institution, there will always be people who do not know about it. But at least liaisons know about it and can spread the word. We have established the mediated deposit service, and we work more closely with some departments. Our engineering is fantastic. They are ahead of the game in OA. They publish so much of NSERC funded publications that they're really on top of OA compliance. They send postprints all the time. Really, that is our poster child, as well as our collaboration with engineering library and engineering liaisons who are comfortable just walking into labs, into faculty meetings and talking about these things. So these are really things that when I'm having a bad day or a bad week, I think about that and it makes me feel better.
Maria, I'm thinking of at the onset of the COVID shutdown, I lamented to my manager, I don't think anyone's going to ever send me an accepted manuscript ever again, because nobody has time for identifying the correct versions of articles anymore. And now the first few copyright reviews I sent out, the first one, he had all of his correct versions back for me within 45 minutes, and I have a special relationship with that faculty member now. And I feel like that will never happen again, but
right.
sometimes
I'm
we can
also
be surprised.
Yeah, but I'm also noticing, just like you, especially at the start of the pandemic, people were so preoccupied with moving to this new way of handling things. But then after a while, I guess some people have ended up having more time on their hands, because we started receiving responses to our requests for postprints that we sent months ago. Someone was obviously going back to their emails, and then suddenly, oh yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't respond. Here are like a couple dozen postprints for you to upload.
That's awesome.
Does anyone else have something they'd like to share that's working well, or speak to something you've put in the Google Doc?
And for those of you who haven't found the raise hand button, you'll need to pull up the participants list, and then you will see it.
If you can't find it, you can just put in the chat, I would like to speak. That works too. Yeah, so Lindsay notes she also got a good call up from faculty recently. No other, oh, I see from York. Please go ahead.
Oh, super. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. I was just thinking about what is working for us with our DSpace instance is we sort of have interesting autonomous zones where particular faculty members for almost 10 years have sort of built their own thriving community. Like we gave them a bit of training and they went to town. So we have some really active, flourishing, not always like best practices, but working really well areas in our repository. So sometimes it's just sort of setting up a framework and then giving someone a little bit of permissions and they sort of make it work for themselves, which has been really successful. And then we have other areas where we just get no pickup whatsoever, but we can always point to the, I think about them as like sort of autonomous zones where people just manage their space to suit their own purposes.
This is my own ignorance of DSpace. Is this like they have their own collections or their own little set that they can kind of manage and put things in and stuff like that?
Yeah. What I could I'll put a link in the chat because it really is. It's sort of wild and I don't know. It's totally different from everything else in our repository, but it works. Just a minute.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
I'm curious what kind of copyright support you provide in that kind of a scenario.
We do our best.
I understand.
We do our best. But part of the conversation and part of the training was around copyright, and I'll show you in a minute.
Thank you. All right, is there anyone else that would like to speak to something that's working really well at their institution right now?
I'm curious to hear from folks who have brought your repositories into successful integrations with other campus systems. I see McMaster with Elements, Concordia with Archivematica, folks like U of T who are doing sword deposits from publishers. If any of you would like to speak to those or not, that's totally all right, but it's good to know that folks have made this happen. Oh, Gabriella.
Sure. Yeah. Can I go ahead?
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't raise my hand. So we recently finished integration with Elements, which is a tool by Symplectic that allows us to create profiles for our faculty members. We use Elements for the backend and Vivo for the front end. Elements comes with two modules. One is the open access monitor, which monitors compliance with open access policies, and we modeled our policies based on the tri-agency open access policies because we don't have one at McMaster. And the other component is the repository tools, which allows faculty members to deposit their publications directly from Elements into DSpace. So Elements has all the metadata. They have to pick the version they want to upload. A Sherpa Romeo information card is available to them at the deposit step. So they know right there which version they're actually allowed to deposit. Once they upload the file into Elements, then the system will automatically send it to our DSpace IR Max here and send back the handle. So it's a pretty nice setup. We only finished the implementation a couple of weeks ago, so we don't have a whole lot content coming through, but we're hoping that we'll see more content coming from that integration.
Great, thank you. Maria, you were next.
I can say a few words about sword deposits. I don't really think of them as integrations as much as just pipelines that bring us stuff. So we have sword deposits come in from Biomed Central, Hindawi, and MDPI. It's really great because we don't have to do anything. They just come in on their own. We also have a non-sword but a different pipeline from Canadian Science Publishing that brings us postprints from all publications, not just U of T publications, for which authors opted to have a postprint be made available through the repository. And that is the bulk of what populates the repository annually. We do still have mediated deposit, and we still help faculty individually, but that is in the hundreds of items, and sword and batch deposits, they bring thousands of items.
All right. Catherine says, I forgot completely about sword. It's just so awesome. It just works, except when your collection structure is built around ETDs. But that's one of the things that I'm hoping to work on more with UW space. So now I know who I can ask for help. Great, Catherine. You had your hand up, Catherine?
Hi, sorry. Too many screens. Yeah, so I just want to talk about our thesis deposits because it's so simple. I mean, everybody's putting their theses into their institutional repositories, or for the most part. But prior to 2018, we did not have one place to access all of our metadata for all of our theses. Within the University of Calgary, you had to hit up 4 different locations or go through people. So one thing that we did in our 2018 migration was to consolidate all the metadata into the institutional repository. And we do not have all of our theses digitized to date yet either. And we don't have a project yet in place to digitize all of our back theses. So right now we're driving our digitization through just a request basis. And so what we did with our DSpace repository is we put in a placeholder for theses that needed to be digitized, and we put an embargo on that. And then once people request any theses that are embargoed, it goes to our digitization unit. If it's been digitized already, it'll automatically go to, well, we can just fulfill that request. And if not, we get a flag to digitize it. So we've set up those workflows based on a placeholder and the file name. And that's been working really successfully for us. In 2017, we had 7 requests for theses total to digitize. And then the next year we had 1,000 requests for theses. So it's just been exponential, the amount of usage that we've seen for our legacy theses.
That's an incredible statistic you just said, from 7 to 1,000.
Yeah, it was insane.
Was it hard to scale up, or how did you find going from 7 to 1,000 in terms of your staff?
Yeah, so I mean, it did mean that we were dedicating 2 days a week or 2.5 days a week to digitizing these theses, but we were happy to do it. So it's kind of, we've taken away from other digitization projects to do this work, but it's important.
Great, thank you so much for sharing. Jordan, I'm just going to do a little bit of a time check. Do you think it would make sense to have maybe one more person talk and before we move on to the next question and have a discussion with that?
If someone has something to say, but it seems like people have feelings about the next question. Now we're moving into the airing of grievances part of the evening. What is something that is a challenge for your repository right now?
So as before, feel free to raise your hand and you can speak to something in particular at your institution, or, you know, just let her fly in that Google Doc. It's it's an open space for any and all. I see Tim, please go ahead.
Oh, hello everyone. As is always the challenge for us is updating and upgrading DSpace. DSpace is the only Java-based platform that we touch, and it's a real pain because Tomcat runs weird. DSpace is kind of, what's the big word? You know, when something is really huge, it's monolithic, that's the word. So just getting the expertise to upgrade is challenging. We're currently at 5.0, trying to get to 6.3, and it's just not working.
Thanks, Tim. I'm sure I imagine that's a common feeling for a lot of DSpace. I'm going to assume for a lot of DSpace institutions. Is there anyone else that would like to speak to a common a challenge that you're currently facing?
For what it's worth, one of the calls that will result from this is a DSpace, or a regular DSpace call, so we can all talk through the stuff that doesn't matter to everyone else. Karen.
Hi. Yeah, I mean, for me, the main challenge, and I know it sounds lame, but I just don't have the time. Like, there's one person to do all Skullcom stuff, and our OER programs are exploding. And I just find that the IR is always like the last thing on the list because no one's yelling at me about it, and everything else people are yelling. So I'm reading all you guys is like what's working well and what are challenges, and I'm like, I'm not even there yet. I haven't even had time to explore that. So it's just, that's very frustrating, and I just feel like often I'm failing at IR management because of that. But I don't really know how to change that because there isn't any other person. So
I see some people want to, Lindsay, is there something you'd like to, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I can definitely echo exactly what Karen was saying. We're also trying to ramp up our open educational support, which again is me. So I'm trying to manage that, but I also just struggle with the expectations that a lot of faculty have about, especially things around metrics, stats, functionalities that we just can't provide as a smaller institution. We don't really have the people to do development work. We also don't have the expertise to do development work. And so it's a struggle, I think, to match sometimes what faculty are looking for in terms of what this actually could be and how it could function versus what our resources are, what resources we have available to us at our institution. And when I say us, I mean me.
Yeah, thank you, Lindsay.
To speak to the situation at Waterloo, thanks to Courtney and Will at Queens, who were my predecessors at Waterloo, we've got a really solid copyright review workflow. But of course, everything falls apart when you send faculty a spreadsheet saying, here are your 70 publications from the last 5 years. We have the version of record for one of them. We will need you to provide us with the following 69 files. It is at that's the step where things tend to fall apart for me. But while I'm managing UW Space, our open journal systems, and a number of other digital repositories, I am still the person at the end of the day who's doing all of the copyright review. So,
Lindsay, did you want to speak again?
Oh, no, is my hand still up?
Oh yeah, that's okay.
Sorry.
I wanted to add something. And I apologize to the person at York. I only see your email address. I don't know your first name. But what I've done is I've liaised with my Office of Sponsored Research to get the list of grant winners at my institution, and then I send that out to the liaisons. And I'm like, you email the people that are your faculty members and congratulate them on winning these major awards and let them know about the open access policy. And I think that's gotten some take up. I say this like but that's been one way of I find of integrating liaison work into the repository that's very, very tangible, because a lot of times I know those professors. So yeah, Michael was one of the liaisons. I made him do that. Are there other people that'd like to speak to some challenges that you're having?
Tomash makes a very good comment about open source software and participation in the community. I work with 2 rad open source developers on DSpace, one of whom has the option to retire right now. And I get nervous that with every conversation about DSpace 7, he's going to sign those papers. But it's, would you like to speak to your involvement in, you're on, is it Eprints?
Yeah, sure. I guess we've been working with the Eprints for a long time, and we always felt like we need to contribute to that community. And so you had mentioned the Archivematica integration, so that's something that we funded ourselves by sort of working with Eprints services, which is support, like software support, and we co-developed the required code for that. And I think that the challenge, I keep mentioning the challenge of keeping the software up to date, and because it comes with all these features that we all want, like Orchid integration and integration with other services like Archivematica for preservation. And it's hard to find still within the library and within the university, there's those same old challenges of dedicating the resources internally to the software development that's needed. But I think it's gotten a lot better. It's just that there's so many competing priorities in the library for the software development needs. I guess that's it. I know that for us, there's a kind of a tug of war between just kind of upgrading what we have to what the community has developed, and also trying to push our own custom kind of integration or development with the platform. And so one strategy that we deploy for that, so for the Archivematica plugin, we made sure to work with the other internationally with the other users of Eprints, so that what we develop is useful for others, so that and also we share at least the testing and so I like and I like what's going on around open air right now and the COVID. I see a lot of collaboration there. I think we need to share that. We need to find better, more efficient ways, I guess, of sharing the work that's required, the software development kind of work that's really needed to maintain these systems.
Thanks, Tomash. Fire Guys, I see that you also have your hand up.
Oh, hi. It's actually Corey Davis from University of Victoria. Sorry. I don't know where that came from. It's the default. I forget to change. Anyway, yeah, I mean, to that point, it was really interesting when I worked for Copal out here in Western Canada. We built preservation services that would sort of hook into repository infrastructure, and it was really, really challenging. People would sign up for these services and be really excited about it, but because people were doing it sort of institution by institution, and all this work was very challenging for people for a bunch of different reasons, a lot of which we've heard of today. So plugging in Archivematica or other services. And so it was really interesting. We worked with BCELN, which is a consortial licensing body out here in British Columbia, but they also run an Islandora-based repository called Arca. And just to that software development piece, we actually work with them to build a locks plugin so that people were able to sort of push individual items or collections into preservation storage. And because we did it at scale, the software development happened sort of in one location at BCELN, and that functionality was available to all of the participants within that repository infrastructure. And so just that idea that when we scale repository infrastructure, some of that software development challenge, some of those challenges, especially connecting with external services, I think it's worth thinking about that in terms of moving forward and what benefits we might achieve as a community.
This seems like a good opportunity to transition into our next question, because it sounds like folks want to talk about how we can consolidate and best team up our efforts across institutions, which of course involves migration for some of us. So if we held another community call, what topic would get you to attend?
And what we'll also do is we'll probably go, I think Jordan and I will go back through the chat and we'll look at some of the challenges that you've already listed. And I think that's also going to be a really great source of finding pain points for people as well. Yeah, I see Dana's comment about not consolidation, but a networked distributed approach. I see people plussing some Orchid integrations, consolidation, best practices. Yeah, it would be nice to what is essential and what is nice to have, right? How do you prioritize with so little time, right? How do you prioritize what do you focus on? workflows. Yeah. Sort of related to that, just mediated versus self-deposit, good in metrics.
I do want to bring up one thing on the Orchid front. I had said on the ORWG list a couple months ago about how I think I had figured out how the expanded Orchid support plugin for DSpace would also allow us to handle batch author record updates. But for those who do work with Atmire and are attending any of their DSpace community calls, they are actually going to be recording a demo of this, which is very exciting for me. And on the networked distributed approach that Dana brings up, I feel like this is a great time for us to transition into the first of the network distributed approaches that are being taken for repositories in Canada here in the open air generation. So, and here with an update on the COVID-19 repository project is, who's going to be speaking to this? Lindsay, I think? Or Kathleen?
Kathleen,
Hello.
okay. And Kathleen I guess Kathleen's my co-host, so will I just drive the bus on the slides, I suppose?
Sure.
Okay.
Either way you like.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm quite excited to present to you this project, which came about in a somewhat ad hoc manner. So the context behind this project is that the Open Repository Working Group has already been working with OpenAIRE, which is the aggregator service, the European aggregator service, to aggregate Canadian content and provide a view of Canadian content in their aggregation based on the name of our 3 tri-agency funders. And the tri-agencies are aware of this and have been kind of nominally working with us around this. And Pierre Lasso is the lead of that task group under the Open Repository Working Group, and he's been helping repositories move forward with the adoption of the OpenAIRE guidelines. So there's specific guidelines about what kind of metadata you need to apply in your repository to be able to be harvested by OpenAIRE. So in March, I was contacted by the tri-agencies who, as you know, have put in millions of dollars into COVID-19 funding. And they asked me if the OpenAIRE COVID-19 Gateway would be an opportunity for them to track the outputs of their COVID-19 funding. And so we had some discussions with OpenAIRE around that, and they agreed that this would be possible. So maybe so we've very quickly formed this very ad hoc task group, and you saw the names of the folks on that task group. And we've been meeting, basically once a week or once every couple of weeks to try to move this forward. So the aim of this project is to support discovery and tracking of Canadian funded COVID-19 research through the OpenAIRE COVID-19 Gateway. Next slide, please. And so we're approaching this in 3 kind of areas. One is to prepare Canadian repositories, and may I say other providers, such as journals, local journals, to be aggregated by OpenAIRE. To identify the projects that are funded through the tri-agencies and other Canadian funded projects related to COVID-19, that's supposed to be 19, and to try to recruit as much of that content either into our repositories or directly through other international data providers into the OpenAIRE Gateway. And then the third aspect of our work is around communications and to raise awareness about this project with some of the key stakeholders, so including you folks, are going to be very important in helping us with this, the research offices and the researchers. One of the things that we've been using as kind of background to this, and I apologize, you may not be able to read it, but it's some guidelines that were published by CORE, which is the Confederation of Open Access Repositories, about what repositories could do to support discovery of COVID-19 resources. And I particularly just point you to the basic recommended metadata elements at the bottom of this document. And so we will be using these basic recommended metadata elements to try to ensure some level of interoperability of those resources in Canada. One of the things I mentioned earlier is that one of the challenges around getting our content from Canadian repositories into OpenAIRE is that they have these OpenAIRE guidelines for literature repositories, which are a little bit challenging to adopt. They use an approach of entities, which are kind of sub-elements, which means that most kind of out-of-the-box repository software systems don't support the OpenAIRE guidelines right now, and some development has to be done. And actually, some Canadian institutions led by Queen's have done some development, but it still takes time to adopt them. So as a kind of interim solution, thank you very much to Gabriella, who has taken the lead at McMaster University to spin up very quickly a DSpace Harvester. And so our idea, I'll turn it over to Gabriella in a second, but our idea here is to be able to aggregate the content from repositories that are not OpenAIRE compliant, make the aggregator OpenAIRE compliant, so the aggregated content can become compliant, and then have that harvested by OpenAIRE. And so maybe I'll just quickly turn it over to Gabriella to give us an update about the aggregator.
Of course, thank you very much, Kathleen. So the Canada research is based on DSpace, which has a capacity to harvest other OAI compliant repositories. And then because this version of DSpace is OpenAIRE compliant, we'll be able to make the records available to the OpenAIRE COVID-19 gateway. So far, I harvested the data from 2 DSpace instances and 2 Eprints instances. Data coming from the DSpace repositories is generally fine. There's a problem with the DC sponsorship, description sponsorship field not being picked up in the OpenAIRE crosswalk. So that's an easy fix, and I can apply it with no problems. But the other problem I noticed is that if the repository is already OpenAIRE compliant, which is the case QSpace, the funder information does not come through properly. So that's something we need to look into. I also harvested 2 Eprints repositories, and that's not going so well. I'm not getting any data, just an untitled record. And so for each record in the original collection, I get an untitled record in Canada research. So that's something we need to work on and fix. But these are all problems to be solved, and it's going to take a little bit, but I'm sure we can sort them out. And I think that's it.
Yeah, I realize we're running out of time here too. So we're, as Gabriella said, we're looking at solutions to resolve any of the problems for this, and we will keep you in touch with that. And then the second thing I mentioned was to start tracking the COVID-19 funded projects. And for that, I'd like to turn it over to Lindsay.
Sure, thank you. So as Kathleen mentioned, one of the key components is attempting to identify where the research funding is going, so that we can then ensure we can, track and hopefully touch base with individuals or research offices to try to get that content into a institutional repository of some sort. So we have set up a shared document where we are attempting to track at various levels, from the tri-agencies, of course, but also provincial funding, foundation funding, and local institutional funding. I know there's a few universities, U of T, of course, is a good example, that they have put some of their own money towards specific COVID-19 funds. So basically, I'm trolling the internet trying to find all of these things for various levels of funders, and then attaching them to universities and hopefully to individuals as well, so we can make contact and ensure that that research, the end result, does not go missing or is somehow not included.
All right, thank you all so much for that. So that brings us to the end of this hour, but I want to thank you all for showing up today, for providing your feedback on what you want to see from your repository community in Canada. And we're going to take some time to review the chat and the collective notes in our task group meeting this week. And that's all I have to say. Jessica, anything else from you?
No, I'd just like to thank everyone for being so engaged and giving us lots of great feedback and sharing all of your ideas. And yeah, thanks for making our sort of inaugural, or this group at least, of the task group so successful.